Well, hello, everyone. I'm Janet B. I've recovered from compulsive eating and bulimia. Happy to be here. And for those of you who are listening on Podbean, just so you know, we do this live every Monday night at 8 p.m. So this is being recorded with about 110 of our friends. So you are welcome to join us. If you're just listening and didn't know that you could log in live Monday, 8 p.m. Eastern, you can go to www.recoverygam.com and all the login information is there. And no, we are not trying to get people here to get money. Everything is completely free. So with that being said, tonight we are going to do more about alcoholism. And as I was prepping this, I saw it's really about four guys who made a lot of mistakes. And so we're going to try and learn from their mistakes. So last week, Melissa talked about there is a solution, which started on step one. And we're going to continue on step one. So step one, we admitted we were powerless over food and our lives had become unmanageable. So before we can move ahead and work the steps, the founders of this program wanted to be sure we really got it. So if you have your big book, we will start on page 30, more about alcoholism. And it starts out by saying, most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics, real compulsive eaters. No person likes to think he's bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Okay, if it was just bodily, right? If it was just like we had an allergy to sugar or flour, whatever a person's allergy is to certain substances, all we would have to do is be locked in a room for about 48 hours till the, physical craving would go away and we'd be fine. But as we all know, that wouldn't work for us. So it's more than body, it's mentally. But to heal mentally, some you might think, well, if it's mentally, then I just have to learn about it and think about it the right way and understand it. But unfortunately, or fortunately, our book tells us that's not the way it works. On page 64 of our big book, it says, once the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. So the order of recovery is heal spiritually, and then mental and physical follow along on its heels. But here they just want to smash home. They want us to really get it that we are different. And it says our drinking careers, our eating careers are characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink or eat like other people. And then they tell us the great obsession. And if we had to do a little fill in the blank guess, we would say the great obsession is food or alcohol, but it doesn't say that. It says the great obsession is that someday he will control and enjoy his drinking. That's the great obsession, not the food, not the alcohol. It's one day I will be able to eat what I want and get away with it. And they say the persistence of this illusion, an illusion like magic, or an insane thought is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. So they're saying that this insane thought that I can have one, let's say for me it was one cookie and then stop, even though I never could, and doing it over and over, they say that's the insanity. So they say, what's the first step in recovery? To fully concede to our innermost selves that we were compulsive eaters. The delusion, right? The insane thought that we are like other people or presently maybe has to be smashed. Well, first question is why, right? Why can't I just start working this program, doing an inventory, cleaning up my past? Why do I have to admit that I'm powerless over food? Why is that even a requirement? And I think here's why, because this gets pretty tough, right? It tells us we have to smash our pride. We've got to go back and make some hard amends. We have to live lives of rigorous honesty. No one's going to do that unless they feel they're out of options. So the first thing we want to do, well, actually, the very first thing, if we're sponsoring, that we want to do is make sure that the person is willing to go to any lengths, right? Page 58, if you've decided you want what we have, and what do we have? You know, a spiritual experience that leads to the removal of the obsession and are willing to go to any lengths to get it. then you're ready to take certain steps. So if someone's there, right, like I'll do anything, then the next thing, step one, right, that willingness allows them to come in and start doing the work is step one, admit we're powerless, smash the delusion. Well, how do we smash the delusion? If I have an insane thought, how am I ever going to smash this? And guys, this is the best way I know to help. And for you've been around, I apologize. You've probably heard this a dozen times. But yes, I'm going to talk about the broken bridge because back in the chapter we did last week, it tells us what our problem is. It says, we are, page 24, we are unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink or the first compulsive bite. So the delusion, my insane thought, is that I can have one and get away with it. I've got to smash that. Well, how do I do that? So this is what I do with the people I sponsor. First, I talk to them about the broken bridge or the bridge. So any of y'all who know me know that I have a terrible cat allergy. So it's like this past weekend, my friend Megan invited me to her house. And the first thing I said is, do you have a cat? Why? Because in my memory are all these data points of cat-induced asthma attacks, sinus infections, getting pretty sick just from being near a cat, even for a couple of minutes. So if someone says, yes, I have a cat, what does my brain do? It scans the data points, generates a thought to run across the bridge to my conscious mind to say, stop, danger. Cats will give you an asthma attack. You can't go. Or I grew up in Miami, worshiping the sun and got some, pretty nasty sunburns. So now, as I'm older and I care about wrinkles, I remember that going out in the sun gives me a sunburn, gets me all wrinkly. So if I'm about to go to the beach, just like last month, my family spent a week at the beach. And before I left, in my memory are all these data points of sunburns, of coming back all red, of coming back and peeling. So generates a thought, run across the bridge to my conscious mind, danger. If you're at the beach without sunscreen, you'll be in trouble. So what do? I pack sunscreen and I wear it. So when it comes to food, you would think the same mechanism works, right? Like I would go and buy a box of cookies and say I'm going to have one or two and eat 20, the whole box and sometimes more and make myself throw up and not be able to get out of bed the next day and go and buy another box and hate myself and then steal my roommate's food and eat it and then go out and get a replacement, but eat the replacement before I could get it back. So then stealing money. So in my memory are all these data points, and I'm about to go and buy my box of cookies to just have one or two. And there it is. You say you're going to have one or two, but you eat the whole box. You say you're going to eat one or two, but then you eat the whole box, a second box, make yourself throw up and steal money. Generates a thought to run across the bridge to my conscious mind. Danger, stop. You won't be able to eat one or two. Except unlike with cats and sunscreens, the bridge is broken and that thought can't get across. I have no effective mental defense against that first compulsive bite. So what do we do about it? Well, we're not there yet, right? We're just at the point where we have to get it. So here's the assignment I give my sponsees. So y'all, might want to just do this yourself. I say, okay, I gave you two examples, cats and sunscreen. So think of two examples in your life where there's something that was dangerous or caused you pain. And then if you're about to do it again, you remember and you don't do it. And then I said, and then think of three very specific examples with food. Like I gave the example of the box of 20 cookies where I'm just going to have one. Three very specific examples where you say, I'm just going to have, one bite, one scoop, whatever. And then you don't. Over and over. See how your bridge is broken, how your memory fails to hold you in check. And that, I think, is how we can smash the delusion. We could put down on paper very specifically, time and time again, what we told ourselves and then what really happened, how our memory failed to hold us in check. So then they go ahead and they tell us that people like us, we're back on page 30, have lost the ability to control our drinking or eating, and we can never, ever recover control. It says, we are convinced that we are in the grip of a progressive illness, which means it gets worse. It has definitive symptoms, right? And one symptom, like a lot of illnesses, if they go untreated, it gets worse, right? If you have bronchitis and it goes untreated, it can become pneumonia. If you have a cyst and you leave it alone, it becomes a bigger cyst and can become dangerous. So it says we're in the grip of a progressive illness. But guys, something really good. The illness is progressive, but recovery is progressive too. If we go to page 8, Bill Wilson says, I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. So stick around because the recovery is progressive and wonderful. So it goes ahead and it tells us we're like men who've lost their legs. They never grow new ones. So that means I can never say, one day my bridge is going to work and I will be able to remember. It never will. So we need a different remedy. And on page 31, it says we've tried every imaginable remedy. In some instances, there's been brief recovery followed always by a still worse relapse. Every imaginable remedy. Well, the pay-in ways don't work if we're real compulsive eaters because this is at its root is a spiritual illness. And, I'm just now thinking of this line if someone says, we have tried every imaginable remedy. I'm thinking of the person who may say, I've been in Overeaters Anonymous for X number of years. I've tried every imaginable sponsor. I've tried it over and over 50 times and it hasn't worked. And I'll just tell you a conversation I had with a sponsee this past week who said, I've done it, tried it 50 times and it hasn't worked. And I said to her, were you rigorously honest all those 50 times? And she said, no. And I said, then you've tried it 0 times. So that was me. I tried it 6.5 years, but I wasn't doing it. I was going to meetings, I was making phone calls, but I wasn't working this program. And I will say straight out, if we're not honest, we're not trying, we're not doing it because this program requires honesty. And I will tell you that this woman, when I said that to her, she's like, oh yeah, and made a decision to be honest. And within a week, I am looking at like a brand new woman in her. In a week, she's on her 4th step and is just totally changed. So we can have rapid transformations here. So they go ahead and they tell us that, despite all we can say, many who are real alcoholics, real compulsive eaters, are not going to believe it. And they go ahead and they just say, you can diagnose yourself. And then they give us some examples. So we're going to start on page 32. We're going to go to our first example, the nameless man. If my friend Harlan was here, I'm sure he would know the name of this guy, but I don't. So we will call him the man of 30. So it says he was doing a lot of drinking. And once he started, he saw he had no control whatever. So he just decided, I'm not going to take another drop. So here's the thing. It's like there's this line that once we cross it, we can't stop. So this guy was able to stop for what was it, like 40 years, 25 years. So he wasn't quite at the line because he was able to put it down for 25 years. But then he started again. And in 2 months, he was a total alcoholic, puzzled, humiliated, couldn't stop. So maybe it was he was right at the line, and his first drink after 25 years put him over the line. And why did he drink again? Because he thought, I put in enough time. I've had a long period of sobriety and self-discipline. So what did he do after that? He tried to regulate his drinking, right? Like probably, oh, I'll only drink on the weekends, or I'll just have one. But we know how that works, right? I'll be able to have one and stop. And that thing like, no, man of 30. Every time you say you're going to have one drink, you end up having 8 drinks and you end up dead drunk. Don't do it. his bridge is broken. The thought doesn't get across. So then he says, okay, I can't regulate it. I am going to stop altogether. He was rich, he tried, and within 4 years, he was dead. So what were some of the mistakes that our man of 30 made? So one is thinking that time did it. And I think time can work in two ways, right? We can say, I have X number of days, weeks, months, years. Now I can do it. Um, or time can be, I'll start tomorrow. I'll put my head on this magic pillow, and 8 hours from now, I'll have superpowers I didn't have before. Doesn't work. And the second thing is he attempted to stop without a spiritual solution, and he got nowhere. It's really sad. Um, so again, they say on page 33, if we're planning on stopping, there must be no reservation, no lurking notion that someday we will be immune to alcohol, so that someday we can eat the way we want. So they say we can have no reservation. Well, how do I get to the point where I have no reservation, that I know that I can't? Um, and I don't think that's something I can just tell myself, remember, because I have a broken bridge. I can know for sure that I can't stop again as long as I'm in fit spiritual condition, because then I'm not relying on my memory to protect me. I'm relying on God to protect me. God keeps me safe and protected. That's what the solution is, but we're not there yet. So here it is, and they go ahead and they talk about how to diagnose yourself, and they say, try to have one and stop. See if you can do it. And then they tell us, for most of us, page 34, there's a tremendous urge to cease forever, yet we found it impossible. This is the baffling feature of alcoholism or compulsive eating, the utter inability to leave it alone, no matter how great the necessity or the wish. I mean, think of someone who has cancer. They have a necessity for their cancer cells to stop multiplying, and they for sure have a wish for their cancer cells to stop multiplying. But no one would say, oh, if your cancer cells are still multiplying, you must not want your cancer to go away badly enough. But yet that's what people say to us. That's what people, I believe, said about me, that she just doesn't want to stop. I wanted to stop. The problem wasn't lack of desire. It was lack of power. So they tell us on page 35, we're going to talk about the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking, for this is the crux of the problem. I believe it works like this. First, there's a spiritual problem. Then our thinking gets distorted and there's a mental problem. And then we end up picking up because we're no longer safe and protected. So spiritual problem will be if I'm harboring resentments, if I'm refusing to make amends, things like that. If I'm not doing what I think God wants me to do, then my thinking starts getting twisted. We start rationalizing, and then before we know it, we start rationalizing, I can have one and I'll be able to stop. So the next guy we're going to talk about is a guy who has a name, this guy, Jim. So here's Jim. He was drinking, he got better, and it said he made a beginning. So he went through the steps, but he didn't help others. And how do we know that? It says all went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Well, back on page 14, it tells us how we're to enlarge our spiritual life. It says through work and self-sacrifice for others. So once we are through the steps, we need to put in the work, put in the self-sacrifice to help other people. And he didn't do it. And what happened? He got drunk 6 times in a row. And what did they do? Did they do what some people do in OA? Say, oh, you ate, goodbye, you need to hear another voice. They did not. First, I never tell people you need to hear another voice. There's nothing wrong with my voice. And there's nothing wrong with your voice if you've worked the steps, have a relationship with God, and are taking someone through the steps, right? If someone isn't doing the work, the problem isn't they need to get a different sponsor. They need to make a decision that they're going to do the work, right? So Here's Jim. So they worked with him. And that's what we do if someone goes into relapse. It says, we reviewed carefully what had happened. Page 120 gives a little more advice about what to do if someone goes into relapse. They have to redouble their spiritual activities, work harder spiritually. So anyway, so here's Jim, and he agrees, and he knows if he doesn't get better, he'll be back in the insane asylum and he will lose his family. So he is afraid. But we turn the page, and top of page 36, it says, yet he got drunk again. He was out, at some diner, and the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. So the thought crossed his mind. It's very interesting. We'll see later on, we'll meet this guy, Fred, and he'll have a thought that crossed his mind too. But back in Bill's story, Bill also had a thought that crossed his mind. But the thought that crossed Bill's mind was, how can I help other people? Because Bill had surrendered his life to God, and therefore he was safe and protected. Here's this guy, Jim, and it looks like he was a little more focused on his work and maybe his family and not really spending any time helping other people. So what were Jim's issues? What did he try that didn't work? Half measures. I'll work most of this program, but I won't work step 12. What else didn't work? Fear, right? Bill says in his story, fear sobered him for a bit. He had a fear that he would lose his family. Fear doesn't do it. And self-knowledge, right? Self-knowledge didn't do it. So there's Jim, all drunk again. I believe, not positive, but as I recall, guy Jim, and I don't even think that was his real name, ultimately did the work and got better. So let's hope so. So page 37, they say, this is insanity, this lack of proportion, this lack of the ability to think straight. And they say, this is how it is for every single one of us. That, the next day we would ask ourselves, what happened? So here's another way our bridge doesn't work. The first is we forget that if we have one, we're going to eat the whole box, bag, carton, house. But sometimes we tell ourselves, I don't care. I don't care if I eat the whole thing. It doesn't matter to me. We forget that we care. We forget that the next day when we wake up, we're going to be miserable about it. Okay? We do care. And again, as we work these steps, God protects us so that we're not interested in food on our food plan, and we do care. So those are all gifts that we get back. So 37 still, it says, in some circumstances, we've gone out deliberately to get drunk or binge, feeling ourselves justified by nervousness, anger, worry, depression, jealousy, or the like. And they say, but even that's like insane. It's like me saying, I had a hard day at the office. Let me put my hand on a hot stove for 5 minutes because I'll feel better. But also we need antidotes. We need to learn how to live. So if we have nervousness, why am I usually nervous? Because things aren't going my way, right? I'm trying to control the world. I have to learn how to let go and not try and control things. Anger. This program has pages and pages on how we're to resolve resentments. Worry, another word for fear. Our book tells us how to resolve fear. Depression, being sad. We have to learn to live with sad. Sometimes things are just sad, and we have to be okay with that. Jealousy, that's not being satisfied. So what's the antidote to that? Gratitude for what I have. Isn't it interesting, like with jealousy, right? People are always saying, oh, God's not fair. This person has this, that, and the other, and I don't. How come, I've got this? But when do we ever go around and say, like, God's not fair? I live in a country where, I've got enough food on the table. I've got heat in the winter, air conditioning in the summer. I've got like healthcare. I'm not blind. I'm not crippled. I don't live in a third world country. God is not fair. He has given me way, way more than I deserve, you know? God gets the short end of the stick a lot. So then they talk about the third guy, the jaywalker, the guy who runs out into the street, gets hit by a car, breaks his arm, breaks his leg, says, I won't do it again, and then goes out again and gets hit by a fire engine. Okay, here's one thing the jaywalker thought might help and didn't, and which I certainly thought would help: consequences, right? If it gets bad enough, I'll be able to stop. If the number on the scale hits X, I'll be able to stop. If, someone might say, if I start throwing up X number of times, I'll stop. It doesn't work. Consequences don't do it for people like us. Who of us ever, looked at a scale and said, it went 1 pound higher than the number I said it couldn't go. Okay, I'll just go on a diet and stop and stay stopped and lose all my weight. Zero of us, because we wouldn't be here, right? We would be watching Friends reruns or, Netflix or something like that. We wouldn't be here now. We're here because consequences didn't help. So, they go ahead and page 38, they smash it home again, like, okay, now I understand. So I won't do it again. But it's like, if I know that my headache is caused by a brain tumor, God forbid, that knowledge isn't going to fix it, right? Like, I would need surgery, I would need outside intervention. So self-knowledge alone doesn't do it. So here we have Fred, the last guy, starts on page 39. Fred's an accountant, okay? Like as straight and narrow as a guy could be. Good income, he has a good home life, he's happily married, his kids are doing well, he's got friends, up and down. Like everything's going great for Fred, except he can't stop drinking. So he meets some of the guys, the early AAs, and they tell him about it. They tell him about, the broken bridge. And I mean, I don't know if they use that term, but they, basically talked about that and how, we can't do it, how we can't remember strongly enough. And he got it. He admitted he was powerless over alcohol and his life was unmanageable. And guess what happened? He got drunk again and ended up in the hospital. And he says, page 40, I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity which precedes the first drink. So he understood, right? The broken bridge, the problem with the memory. But I was confident it couldn't happen to me after what I learned. I reasoned I wasn't as far as advanced as most of you guys, and I'm usually successful at licking my other problems. So he said he went about his business and he went to Washington to present some accounting evidence. Okay, that doesn't sound like some big, hoopla party. He's presenting some accounting evidence in Washington to a government bureau. And he got drunk. The thought came to mind, again, just like Jim, these thoughts came in, that it would be nice to just have 2 drinks before dinner. That was it. And he had 2 drinks. And of course, the two turned into, I don't know, 12, 22, we don't know. And that was it. And he came back and he was beat. And he said, I went carefully over that evening in Washington to see what had happened. That's really important. Sometimes a person will binge and what they'll just do is say, okay, I'll start tomorrow. Tomorrow is a new day. That is not what this program tells us to do, because then, it's like Groundhog Day. Tomorrow will be just like today, and next week and next year and, the next decade. So we don't want to do that. If someone goes off the food plan and eats compulsively, the right thing is to say, okay, let's see what happened. Where'd you go off spiritually? And then where were you off mentally? Because that always precedes a relapse. So finally, they meet with him and they tell him that he had an alcoholic mind and he learned that willpower and self-knowledge wouldn't help. So what are the things that Fred tried? He tried a first step all by itself and it got him nowhere. Another thing, he went out of town early before he had like worked through the steps. And if we remember, same with Dr. Bob, he was doing okay and then he went out of town. So I'm just saying that to caution that when we're early in recovery, before we go through the steps, we want to keep our lives like kind of small. We say sometimes that it's like being in outpatient rehab. You go to work, you take care of your family, you take care of your personal hygiene, of course, and you spend the majority of your time like immersed in recovery things. And if we have to go out of town, which sometimes we do, we talk with our sponsors and we're really careful about it. And the other thing he tried was willpower. I understand what my problem is. I will try it on my own. Didn't work. So then, only after he admitted he had a problem, they gave him the solution. And it's page 42, it says, they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Imagine 100 alcoholics all did the same thing and got better. And he said, a spiritual answer and program of action, spiritual, faith, surrender to God, doing God's will as best we can, and a program of action, clearing up the wreckage of our past, and once making amends, then clearing up the wreckage of each day and helping others. And he said, the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. And that was my experience too. I'd been stuffing bagel chips down my throat behind a locked bathroom door, but right before a meeting. I went to the meeting. I took a tough as nail sponsor who I was scared of, but who I knew would let me get away with nothing. And I said, I will do whatever you tell me. And then I went out in the parking lot and I basically said to God, everything I know about you is wrong and I'm willing to start over. And my compulsive eating condition was relieved just like that. And I have a note here, a saying I heard once, willingness allows grace to enter. When we are willing to do the work, that allows the grace of God to enter and help us. So then Fred continues, page 42, 43. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems, our work problems, our marriage problems, all our, yeah, I was going to say our health problems. And I was about to stop myself and say, well, no, it doesn't solve our health problems. But I'm going to take that back because first in the chapter, I think it's the family afterwards, it says, were miracles of like mental and physical health, that a spiritual way of life is a most powerful health restorative. But I would say, even if we have health problems and they end up being bad, spiritual principles help us there because, sometimes we can get to the point where we realize I'm not entitled to everything. A guarantee of perfect health and a life where I live to 100, working out until my last day as I'm 99 years old. I'm not guaranteed that. And this program helps us with that. In fact, I'm thinking now, there's an assignment I used to give sponsees years ago. I would say, okay, take 5 problems that you have and go in the big book and find the answer to those problems. So I don't give that anymore, but it's I think it could be helpful. So then he says, I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. Notice the way he talks. He didn't say, I brought myself into a new way of living. I have been brought by God. God carried him. God brought him. And he says, I hope it's more useful. Look at the change, right? We go from selfish and self-centered to where we really hope we're useful. We want to be useful. It's like fun working with people and like seeing the spark come back in them. It's fun. So then they go, and then at the bottom of 43, they start giving us a glimpse, a bit of the solution. Um, Fred said, oh, no, there's a doctor now they're quoting. They don't give the name, but actually I was sharing on this paragraph on a meeting and someone actually texted me, thought that I'd be willing to say it, the name of the doctor, Dr. Percy Pollock of Bellevue. So he is the doctor who said, Alcoholics are hopeless. And he said, you were 100% hopeless apart from divine help. And there it is. Even a doctor who says he's not a religious person, the solution is divine help. And what does divine mean? It's of God. Okay. Not a doorknob, not the group, God. That is the solution. And in the bottom paragraph, the last paragraph of the chapter, where they sum it up before they turn into the solution, they say once more, it's like, okay, they're hitting us over the head with it. The alcoholic or the compulsive eater at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink, the first bite. Remember, we have a broken bridge, no effective mental defense. Well, if we don't have a mental defense, we need a different kind. And the kind this book talks about is a spiritual defense. They say, except in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. So that means sponsor can't be the higher power and the group can't be the higher power, right? They say his defense must come from a higher power, capital H, capital P. And throughout this book, when they do that, they're talking about God. So they sum it up by reminding us, and they're saying, remember, we want to smash this home. We have no mental defense against the first compulsive bite. Our defense must come from God. And we turn the page, which we'll do next week, and we'll set about finding this God. And with that, I will pass.